Thank you. I'm Harold Keller. I'm the Director of the Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships here at USF, and I want to welcome you to this forum. This is a forum that is going to be presenting research and information relative to TBX. I've been asked also to say that opinions that are provided are the opinions of individuals, not of USF or of the Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships. But definitely USF and the Office of Community Engagement has some skin in the game with regard to the area that is impacted or may be impacted, will be impacted, not sure of the appropriate words, by the TBX expansion. We have lots of partnerships that go on in that area that are meaningful to our students and to our faculty, and most importantly to our community partners. And so without further ado, let me turn this over to Rob Lurai, who will moderate the event.
All right, thanks, Harold. Well, hi, everybody. I just want to say that I'm the news director at WMNF Radio, and I know that the campus radio station, WUSF, has done programs about this. I've done, I think, 3 shows about this, and no show in recent memory about a local issue has generated more intense calls, feelings. I get so many communications from people that live here in the Tampa Bay area that think about this. Most of us do drive on I-275 and I-4. Most of us have seen how the communities of Seminole Heights and Tampa Heights and Ybor City have changed. I've lived here for 36 years, and the changes have been pretty dramatic. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to hear 8 presentations giving us, I think, a really wide-angle view of the TBX project. And we're lucky to have people from the campus, people from the community, and from the Florida Department of Transportation. We're asking our panelists to take about 7 minutes and share their area of expertise on this. And then at the end of the and I'm going to be timing them too. So if they go over 7 minutes, I'm going to ask them to wrap it up, finish their thought. At the end, we're going to open up the floor to you so you can ask questions and maybe add or challenge or maybe cheer on something that you've heard here. So let's start with our first presentation tonight, and that's Beverly Ward, who is with BGW Associates. Beverly is going to give us an overview of the history of highway construction in the Tampa urban core.
Thank
Beverly.
you. Good evening, everyone. It's a little bit later than afternoon. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit more than just about Tampa and the history of the interstate here in Tampa, because it's a bigger problem. I want to trouble you a little bit. This is the Tampa core in 1957. It's an aerial photograph, and this is about Central Avenue, Nebraska, that whole corridor. And what we're the root of all this began almost 60 years ago. The Interstate Act will be 60 years old this year. And what we know from history is that there were choices made about where the interstate would go. And those were social, political choices. And a lot of people do not understand. A lot of laws that we thought that we take for granted today were not in place in 1956. There was no Civil Rights Act, there was no Voting Rights Act, there was no planning, and as early as 1970, Helen Levitt documented in her book Superhighway, Super Hoax that black communities were disproportionately affected by superhighway plans. Not only black communities, but low-income or blue-collar, working-collar communities. Some of you may be familiar with David Lewis's Divided Highways, both the book and the movie. He again documents that. There's also extensive work that's done by, has been done by Dr. Robert Bullock and Angela Torres on environmental justice, not only around highways, but around siting of black communities, on brownfields, and so on. And most recently, even almost too recent for this slide, U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox talked about when he was a kid, his mother wasn't worried about where he rode his bicycle because their community was hemmed in by 3 interstates. So there is lots of documentation around the country about how interstates have impacted low-income and minority communities. Overtown's another example here in Florida. And there are also indirect and cumulative impacts, and I'll talk more about this later and what that means. But at the same time, the use of the interstate highway system politically was tied into other urban renewal efforts, such as slum clearance or whatever. So, by 1982, this is what the interstate looked like. In the process of creating this, just along this corridor and here, more than 3,000 structures were taken out. And that's just that area. So, to give you some sense of where, what the impacts are, you'll hear later about the length of the proposed project. It is I-275, I-4, and I-75, roughly 70, 80 miles one way, and the costs and so on. So we think of that, what happened with that in 1982, and 60 years later, we're still talking about additional impacts. And I'll stop there for now and save my time for later on. Okay.
That's quite a smart strategy. Let's bring up Cheryl Rodriguez. Cheryl.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks, Beverly. Hi, I'm Cheryl Rodriguez. I'm the director of the Institute on Black Life. My task this evening is to briefly discuss the impact of highway construction on local neighborhoods, and I'm going to talk about Tampa because that's what I study. I'm going to just speak briefly in both historical and contemporary context. My research focuses on historically black communities here in Tampa. I look at the impact of policies and politics on these communities, and in doing so, I also learn about the histories of these communities and the issues that are and have been important to people who live in them. All of the communities I study have been affected by some aspect of urban renewal and highway expansion. In fact, in some of the communities, I have interviewed residents who came to the community, the imperiled community, because they were displaced by some form of redevelopment. Now, historically, you can't talk about highway expansion without also talking about urban renewal, as Beverly just suggested, because from the 1940s through the 1970s, urban renewal was a big umbrella that constituted a number of federal initiatives, including housing programs, the National Defense Highway Program of 1956, and other programs that focused on redeveloping cities. So urban renewal and highway expansion were and are very powerful forces that eventually contributed to change in cities. Some good, some questionable. But also, these also affected people's lives in some very traumatic ways. Now, although highway expansion was a federal initiative, as we know, it was also an effective tool for urban redevelopment in various cities. At the end of World War II, leaders in Tampa felt that there was a need to expand the city's economic base beyond the cigar industry. There was much discussion by members of the Chamber of Commerce comparing Tampa to Miami and Jacksonville in terms of population, business and industry, and tourism, and of course tourism. City leaders were convinced that Tampa should be a city that should attract industry. They were also concerned about keeping people in the city limits so that the city would grow and prosper. Business expansion and tourism were major components for diversifying the community. But urban renewal and highway expansion were the major forces that would propel business and tourism. In the 1940s, urban renewal and the building of the highway system in Tampa led to significant displacement of low and moderate income residents, particularly those living in a historically black neighborhood near downtown Tampa. On the periphery of this neighborhood, known as the Scrub, it's the original African American community founded at the end of the Civil War. On the periphery of this neighborhood, a black business enclave developed, consisting of restaurants, movie theaters, professional offices, and many businesses that served the needs of black people during the Jim Crow era. By the mid-1960s, urban renewal dislocated nearly 500 households and 60 businesses in the vicinity of the Scrub and the Central Avenue Business District. And this was just the beginning of the end for this community. The highway system followed with the construction of the Jefferson Avenue overpass and the exit to Interstate I-275. The construction of the highway in this neighborhood cleared 2 blocks of the Central Avenue Business District and demolished a significant portion of the residential area surrounding Central Avenue. There was a long period in which the business owners tried to keep their businesses going, but due to construction, due to the streets were blocked off, and that made access to businesses nearly impossible. Eventually, this business district died, and there were other factors that led to the demise of Central Avenue, but urban renewal and the highway were 2 of the most powerful forces. Business owners lost their livelihoods, and some of them never recovered from the loss of their life's work. In terms of housing, the availability of replacement housing was quite limited, and as we know, there is still a crisis in housing, particularly for low-income residents today. According to historical records, of any single project, the construction of I-4 and I-75 dislocated more families and destroyed more buildings than any other redevelopment project, and it affected people of all ethnic groups. Between 1945 and 1975, residents of Tampa saw 4 urban renewal ventures and 2 highway projects. While the completion of I-4 and I-275 did contribute to mobility, it also contributed to the demolition of many structures. Some of these structures were dilapidated, but others were viable. Often people felt they had no real voice in these processes. In fact, for poor people, there was very little change in terms of the quality of their housing and the safety of their neighborhoods. So back in the 1940s, city leaders had a vision for downtown Tampa. They thought that redevelopment and the creation of the highway system would invigorate downtown. But the highway system actually contributed to the expansion of suburban residential communities, which is what that was not their aim, and eventually suburban commercial development. So the dream of a vibrant downtown continues. And what was once Central Avenue is now Orange Avenue, which is simply an on-ramp to the interstate. So is that my time? Are you telling me? All right. So I had another example, but I'll leave you with that. That's dramatic enough. Thank you very much.
Let's hear from Ed McKinney from FDOT.
Okay, I'm going to blow through this as fast as I can. Tampa Bay Express is a series of projects, and I've got maps here too for those that want to see the project, and this is the map that I have as a handout up here. So Tampa Bay Express is a series of projects comprising of 50 miles of roadway improvements connecting our region's major activity centers. The project includes a replacement of the aging northbound span of the Howard Franklin Bridge and the reconstruction of I-275 at State Road 60, which is the interchange in West Shore, and the I-275 I-4 interchange in downtown Tampa. The project also introduces dynamically tolled express lanes within the medium of I-275 and I-4 next to the general purpose lanes, and provides transit opportunities throughout the system. One of the great benefits of the system is you now have a choice. Tampa ranks high in the nation and in the state when it comes to congestion. The express lanes offer a direct connection from USF to downtown Tampa, West Shore Business District, Tampa International Airport, and on to Pinellas County. Travel times to these destinations are expected to decrease in all lanes as a result of the reconstruction of these interchanges. While we absolutely need new roadway capacity to meet the future demands, we understand that building more lanes is only part of the solution. We must use a multimodal approach to address our regional transportation needs, and DOT has spent over $80 million on transit over the past 10 years. And this gives you an example of some of the things that DOT has led as it relates to transit. However, we can only be as successful with strong local agency partnerships and community support. DOT can provide funding for upfront capital costs of a premium transit system, but there must be a solid regional plan and a long-term financial commitment from the community in order to compete for transit funding. Tampa Bay Express not only provides a 44-foot median for regional premium transit, but immediately allows express buses and public school buses to use the express lanes toll-free. In addition, FDOT purchased 2 multimodal centers, one in West Shore and one in downtown Tampa, and has partnered with HART on the upcoming premium transit feasibility study. These efforts lay a foundation for premium transit in the local area, but the locals must get together with us and unite to come up with that plan. In 2012, the Florida legislature made Florida one of 4 states nationwide to permit the use of autonomous vehicle technology within vehicles operating on public roadways. FDOT is continually looking for ways to incorporate autonomous vehicles into the design of our roadways. Industry-wide global partnerships will help us develop strong policies that successfully integrate this new technology into the transportation infrastructure. And obviously, if you need more information on what we're doing, there's a state website that talks about that. Every DOT project, from a minor sidewalk improvements to a major interchange reconstruction, goes through a standard engineering and environmental review. The Tampa Bay Express was conceptualized in the Tampa Interstate Study and Final Environmental Impact Statement in the 1990s, and has been reevaluated numerous times over the past 3 decades. One of the project commitments involves historic preservation. To date, FDOT has conducted 5 cultural resource surveys with 2 underway. We've relocated over 60 historic structures and enabled 70 homeowners to restore their historic homes through a revolving trust fund. FDOT is committed to reconnecting communities that were originally segmented in the 1960s. In the West Shore Business District, FDOT is planning to add north-south connections under the interstate of Rio, Occident, and Trask Streets. In downtown Tampa, we're working with local communities to identify potential north-south and east-west connections within the interstate. We have partnered with the USF Florida Center for Community Design and Research on a series of design charrettes to help identify community values that can be incorporated into the interstate design. We think these have a high potential for enhancing the walkability and safety of the neighborhood. These are excellent opportunities in downtown Tampa and West Shore Business District to enhance walkability through connections of multi-use trails. DOT is reviewing potential corridors for the Tampa Heights Greenway, which will begin at Columbus Avenue and connect the Waterworks Park, providing access to the Riverwalk. In the West Shore area, we are reviewing the current and planned pedestrian amenities to connect West Shore to the Courtney Campbell Trail. In the past 3 decades, DOT has implemented sections of the interstate expansion as funding becomes available. The urban design guidelines outline the aesthetic treatments and amenities that will be considered as each project is implemented. We have completed or nearly completed several sections, including I-4 through Ybor, the I-4 Selman Connector, and the I-275 through West Tampa. The Tampa Bay Express will also incorporate the urban design guidelines on the remaining sections of the interstate through the downtown core and through West Shore. So again, thanks for allowing us. I know that was a lot of information, and I read from a script to make sure I stayed within my 7 minutes. But if you need additional information as it relates to the project, obviously we're going to stick around, and I'll be here to answer questions. But we do have a website that you can go to get more information. But please take a map, obviously, before you leave as well. So, thank you.
Okay, Ed, thank you. So next we've got Beverly Ward back again. So this is what you were planning all along.
Yes. Okay. As from the the FDOT website, as originally proposed, the facilities included I-75, I-275, and I-4. And so what I did is I just threw this in a GIS and dropped the neighborhoods associations from both the county recognized neighborhood associations and the city of Tampa. And let me be clear, not everybody lives within a neighborhood, so this should give you a rough idea of the neighborhoods that would be impacted. So this is I-4, this is I-75, and this is I-275. So roughly, as originally proposed, the facility would impact about 45 neighborhoods and homeowners associations. And that includes both Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa. And I've heard other people tell me that it's even more than that. So then, fooling around with this is, I dropped the neighborhood names from this and just pulled up the 2010 census block groups. And what we're looking at is the minority population as a percentage of the total population in these block groups. And this is important. And the census looks at several races, but treat only one ethnic group, Hispanic. So if you look down here, I did the numbers right. This is where you see a 200%. Those are block groups where the majority minority population is both all Hispanic, all other ethnic, other racial minority, okay? So the range you can see there, and some of the block groups are covered up. The importance of this is we're looking at whether or not there are disproportionately high or adverse impacts that we need to consider when looking at this facility. That plays into the executive order on environmental justice and federally assisted programs. Okay, and also there are Title VI issues going on. Recently, the Environmental Protection Agency developed an environmental justice screening tool that I've been fooling around with, and this is just a screenshot looking at the environmental justice block group indices. And these are all the block groups in this area. And again, I put the facility in and just looked at 275, which is highlighted here. And this particular screening tool that I'm looking at is traffic proximity. The darker red colors show you the block groups that would be adversely that are adversely impacted already by traffic proximity to the existing facility. What that means is that what the EPA suggests when you use their environmental justice screening tool is that this is a place to begin to look for Title VI issues in terms of discrimination and also environmental justice issues. There's a litany of other considerations that go on here. Remember, some of these considerations and laws and policies and guidelines were not in place originally, but they are in place now. And so these are some of the things to look at. So roughly, to expand on this, my concern is that expansion of the facility may exacerbate some existing concerns and create new issues. There is, as Dr. Rodriguez already mentioned, there's displacement, there's disruption, and Dr. Minnie Fullilove, who is a psychiatrist, has wrote extensively about the impact of root shock, displacement by these projects, and has documented studies throughout the U.S. on how people still have strong emotions associated with being displaced by the interstate and other urban renewal projects. Also, there's the issue of modal choice, and we seem to be at a place where we're looking at, we're focusing on extensive investments into toll facilities and express bus, while at the same time the dialogue and maybe this is part of that dialogue about other alternative modes. A great example is that 25 years ago when I moved here, you could not use your USF ID to ride the HART buses. That is now free. It's amazing. You go out at 10 o'clock at night and there's a bus and people are using them and ridership is up. And in terms of the demographics of this area, it has definitely changed in terms of why people want to use. I'm not going to read all of this, and I'm getting the high sign, but you can see there, variable pricing is problematic also. So, and again, there are a number of environmental, social, and other impacts that we need to consider, and I want to trouble you again with these. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got to apologize because for some people I've got really long biographies. And I didn't read Ed's long biography.
That's fine.
But let me just read the first 3 lines. He's the interim planning and environmental administrator at FDOT. He's been with the department for 25 years, serving in various capacities for both District 1 and 7. He's also the district program management administrator responsible for the department's work program, scheduling and plans delivery, and he served 6 years in the U.S. Air Force. So, and thank you. Now we've got Rebecca Zarder, and Rebecca is an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of South Florida. Her research focuses on human-environment relationships. She studies water, resources, climate change, urban community and school agriculture, and informal science education. Her work in Central America and Tampa Bay has been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation.
And maybe you can also introduce Liz Strom now too.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're actually
You're a
sharing
team.
our 7 minutes.
Right,
Okay, all
have
right.
3.5 minutes.
And
I'm
Liz
kind of
Strom,
gearing up for this.
sorry. He's an associate professor of public affairs who has most often collaborated with Tampa Heights for service learning research.
Great, and I'll thanks everyone for being here tonight. We're looking forward to hearing more from you in just a moment. What I'm going to do is what I think I'll focus on here with my comments is provide the sort of human face of some of the neighborhoods that are likely to be impacted by this project. And in particular, looking at future generations, looking at the kids who live in these communities. So in the wake of highway expansion, one of the ways communities have reclaimed the spaces that were impacted by the urban renewal projects that we've heard quite a lot about is through urban and community gardening and the development of neighborhood places where people can gather to achieve lots of different aims. And one of the growing realizations that has come about over the last several decades is that gardens in particular provide many benefits for residents in urban communities. And this is one of the ways, sort of in the shadow of highway expansion, that neighborhoods, not only in Tampa, but many cities throughout the U.S., have reclaimed those spaces to grow food, to address food insecurity, and also provide a space for kids to learn those kinds of skills as well. So just really briefly, I'm going to show a few slides that are based on some work that my students and I, graduate students, undergraduate students, several of whom are here in the audience today. So all of you, thank you for your role, especially Alex Lancy, who is helping me with this work this past fall. And my students and I have been interested in several questions around the ways urban gardening is affecting children and families in urban neighborhoods. What are the benefits? What are kids learning from being in these spaces? And the one I'm going to focus on the most is Tampa Heights, who I've had the pleasure of being a partner with in research endeavors most recently between 2013 and 2016. So this quote, I think, sums up a lot of what people think community gardening does to sort of reclaim spaces, to build communities. There's a lot of research that documents this process in many different cities across the U.S. So this person who did an interview with us as an anthropologist says, I think a community garden has a way of bringing neighbors together. Every school should have one so their children would know, and they should take the food in the cafeteria and let kids grow their food that they eat in the cafeteria. And this sentiment really kind of represents a lot of information that people have shared with my students and I over the course of doing this service learning research. So there's a growing sort of interest and recognition in the value of spaces like community gardens for, as I mentioned, all kinds of benefits for kids. We're also interested in how the youth can be seen as important actors who not only experience these spaces, but have really strong opinions about what they want the future of their communities to look like. How do they see these spaces 20 years in the future? And I think that's one of the questions that I'm hoping we'll be able to address in the discussion later on today. These are some recent pictures that were taken in the Tampa Heights Community Garden and capture some of the ways people have reclaimed the space and really turned it into a focal point of the community. This is the Tampa Heights Community Center, which many of you are familiar with. The last thing that I'll leave you with, and I'm just going to go through some of these images really quickly to make sure that my colleague over here has some time, and that is my students and I have been documenting the development of the garden programs and the other sort of entrepreneurial and skills building efforts of the Tampa Heights Junior Civic Association and Community Garden. And what we have documented is a really amazing arc of engagement and expansion in that community. So this was, these images were taken in 2013 at the beginning of a lot of the garden program efforts with an after-school program. And as you can see, these are sort of fledgling efforts. Students were interested in how children are learning through the process of gardening. We are also interested in how programs impact both youth and families and promotes healthy eating. And one of the things that I think you can say about the work that we have done is also just document the importance of personal relationships. The people who participate in this kind of programming and in a neighborhood like Tampa Heights really make all the difference. There are elementary school participants in our research, middle and high school students. And one of the things to wrap up that students have documented as far as the benefits of these programs are the things that you see here. And I think more importantly, just to close out my comments, you may be wondering what's the connection between the images I'm showing here and the topic that we're discussing tonight. But I think going back to the other point that I made, the key focus is thinking about what are the communities that these kids want to see in their neighborhood 20 and 30 years from now. What do those look like? What would we like them to look like for them? So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks. And I brought these images of the community garden are there because what I always think is sort of ironic is that about a year ago I was planning an online summer class about urban planning and policy. And have any of you taken online classes or taught them? So you know how they have like these instructor videos at the beginning, you introduce yourself, they film it. And so the people who do that asked me where I wanted to have it filmed, and I said, can we film it in the Tampa Heights Community Garden? And we did. And I explained to the students that the reason I wanted to film it there was that this garden and the community center were such great examples of what communities can do. And here's the irony, because this is before the TBX announcements. I pointed to the highway and I said, this is an example of how the bad old days of highway builders taking communities are over. Because you see this highway here, and FDOT was kind enough to say, we're not going to need this land for God knows how long, so we're going to give it to the community to use over the next few decades. That's in my video, because that's how we understood this relationship. And in fact, I believe the FDOT secretary even came to plant a tree because this partnership was so strong. So the reason I'm really pissed about this is not even so much because it's a wonderful community garden, because honestly, if we were losing this community garden for some fabulous project that we all knew we needed, we wouldn't be here, would we? Community gardens can be temporary, we know that. But it's for a highway expansion, and I have to tell you, I have been studying, teaching, and researching urban planning and design for 30 years, and there's one thing I can tell you, nobody in the past 3 decades thinks it's a good idea to lose urban core in favor of highway building. That idea is so 1950s. I expect to have June Cleaver come out in an apron to explain to us why we need this highway, because it's just not done anymore. It's not done in the United States. It's not done in other countries. You do not find cities in advanced industrial areas deciding that their highways are more important than their urban core. And I'm not just saying this because it's some liberal, radical idea. When you hear what they're saying in the business community, when you hear what Jeff Vinnick is planning for downtown Tampa, it's not, let's build a highway. It's, we want authentic urban spaces. They're talking about how Tampa has good bones. We can build on these bones. So why on earth are we taking the areas that have that urban grid, that have that historic housing? Why are we taking those areas and sacrificing them for highways? The Secretary of Transportation in the United States no longer thinks this is a good idea. Only in Florida is this what we think of as progressive urban policy. And so the last thought I'll leave you with is that if people tell you, yes, but the engineers say this is what we need, I think engineers are great. I love engineers. Engineers are the best problem solvers in the world. If you say to them, here's the problem, we need to get cars from Wesley Chapel to downtown as fast as possible and create a revenue stream for our private sector investors, they will give you TBX. If you say to engineers, our goal is to maximize options for mobility and preserve urban neighborhoods, they will find something else. So thank you very much.
Those of you with stopwatches will note that I gave her 2 extra minutes. All right, but I think having 2 people crammed into 7 minutes, I think it's just fair to do it that way. Let's bring up former Tampa City Councilwoman Linda Salcena, and Linda has been deeply involved in urban issues since taking office years ago.
Thank you. Actually, I was deeply involved 40 years ago. I was a young urban planner, and my goal was to redevelop neighborhoods. And I felt that the local elected officials weren't paying attention, so I thought, well, that's simple. You just run for public office and tell everybody what they should be doing, which turned out to be a little problematic. But I did, as an elected official, I was on city council for 20 years, but I was on the Metropolitan Planning Organization for almost 24 years. I'm very knowledgeable about neighborhoods and transportation and the impact. The reason that I wanted to be on city council was because I care about neighborhoods and preservation and a vibrant urban core. But the reason I wanted to be on the MPO, which stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization, is because they make the critical decisions. So after Beverly Ward, eloquently showed us what happened when the original interstates were planned, and they were so devastating to neighborhoods, there was a hue and cry all over America. And the federal government said, we should give the local areas a voice. So what they did is create in every community, in every county, a metropolitan planning organization consisting of local elected officials. So in Hillsborough County, for example, you have city council members, you have county commissioners, you have the mayor of Plant City and the mayor of Temple Terrace. But then I did this when I was the chairman of the MPO, and in hindsight, it was not a smart thing to do. I added the head of the Expressway Authority, the Port Authority, the Aviation Authority as voting members. But the difference between those folks and the elected officials is that they were not elected, and the majority of their funding came directly from the Department of Transportation. So they are not going to vote against anything proposed by the Department of Transportation. This is known as the clarity of hindsight, and it's very good. But we still have the majority of the members on the MPO as elected officials who need to be, theoretically at least, responsive to their constituents. So when I was an MPO member, we looked at a variety of things, and we really assumed that by this moment, we would have a variety of true transportation options. we did studies, we put things on the ballot for rail, for expanding the streetcar so it became a real transportation system, for a variety of modes, for light rail, for heavy rail. We even, you may remember when President Obama came to Tampa to say, we have got this $2.3 billion to create a high-speed train linking Tampa to Orlando. It was a heady time. It was a very positive, hopeful time, and we thought that these things would pass. And I am crushed to share with you what you already know, which is that they didn't. But this governor that we have today is pressing on with his idea that not just Tampa, but 5 cities in the state of Florida should have these toll roads. And these aren't regular toll roads. These are you pay a lot extra toll roads. And the reason that he likes this funding mechanism is because it removes some of the oversight by the legislature because they become self-funding, and it gives the state the resources to press on with building them. These are done without, in my opinion, adequately communicating with the communities how they're going to be impacted by this. I think it's a dreadful waste of money. I think it's devastating to our historic neighborhoods, but I'm supposed to be talking about the politics. So the politics is that traditionally Florida prospered by building suburbs, and that has been the traditional model. And the campaign contributions by the developers and the people who are involved in the highway industrial complex are extremely significant. And that's who's pushing the Chamber of Commerce to support this, the West Shore Alliance, the Downtown Partnership, and then some of the elected officials such as Mayor Bob Buckhorn, who in today's State of the City, interestingly, did not mention TBX, which I thought was fascinating, but he did mention rails and other forms of transportation. So the bottom line is, there is this funding mechanism for elected officials that's underwritten by the developers. But until the local community, and I really have to applaud the Sunshine Citizens for getting organized and becoming vocal, there was no pushback and nobody knew that this was happening. And even now, the organizations are beginning to rouse citizens, and it will end up being a battle of political pressure. On June 22nd, the MPO will revisit the issue of June 22nd, so Tuesday night at 6:30 downtown at the county center, 6 o'clock. So there are 16 members. There need to be a majority of positive votes to pull it off the plan or a majority of votes to keep it on the plan, it being TBX. This doesn't mean that components of it couldn't continue, such as the Howard Franklin improvements or something like that, as a non-toll facility. But the political battle will be waged on that night, and so those of you who care about this issue, that is the pressure point. To be truly effective, you should start putting pressure on right now in every possible way. Yard signs, t-shirts, showing up for meetings, speaking, doing things online, real letters. But that is the time when it all comes to a head. So politically, that would be the time to make your voices heard.
All right, thank you.
Next, we've got Professor Cecil Greek, an associate professor of sociology. His areas of expertise are media coverage of deviance. Is that what this is?
Yeah.
And,
No, well, that's funny.
and social problem film.
I don't know if people read Nicholas Kristof
Yes.
in the New York Times, and something that he says frequently is that he can print stories about things that happen to hundreds of thousands of people and nobody cares, but he prints a story about something that happened to one person in a specific location, and people seem to care much more about what happened to one person. So my story here is partially a tale about what's happened to one person, but trying to fit it into a broader context. I only started looking at media coverage of TBX once I became familiar that there was such a thing and that some issues related to it were going on. And I tried to pull stories as they became available. and then went back over some as prepared for this presentation. And when you look at the early stories, it seems like the media coverage seems to convey the idea that the expressway expansion and the overhead toll road are sort of already done deals. And we're just going to have to kind of accept that. And that opponents of the project are really kind of, you know, troublemakers in this process. But over time, however, the media started to pick up on the protest movement. It started to get greater media attention, and the focus started to shift in the media to a new set of issues. And there were questions about the financing of the expansion. In January, we had this boondoggle report. I'll talk about that in a little bit. People started questioning whether alternative forms of transportation for the region were being ignored and should be considered more fully. And most recently, people have started looking at the charrettes process and whether it's actually taking seriously people's objections to the project, or whether that's something they're not really allowed to talk about as part of this process. So now, I will admit that my interest in this came from the fact that our Department of Sociology here had already been working for nearly a year with the Tampa Heights Junior Civic Association, with the garden and other things, and working inside the building, and incredible things were going on there. And then suddenly this story appeared in the newspaper about how the project might impact the building, which sits right next to it. And so this was sort of my first learning about this, and to talking to Alina, of course, who we were working directly with. But here's an August 2015 report, which argues that basically of 100 people who showed up to protest, this was an MPO meeting, that there were people on both sides, right? There were community residents, but also representatives were there from the Chamber of Commerce, the West Shore Alliance, the Tampa Bay Innovative Alliance, the Tampa Bay Partnership, and the development team for the Tampa Bay Lightning owner, Jeff Vinnick. So they were all there and spoke, apparently, in favor of this project. It also mentions in this particular article that Laney Young was the only person who showed up to protest at the first MPO meeting in June that brought up this issue. So we might have like, is it enemy of the people, Ibsen? Okay, before all can know, one must know. Now, the idea of looking at alternatives appeared in October stories that talked about the purchasing of the tracks from CSX. So that's something that I guess had been talked about before, but that had become another issue, and that's become an important part of this discussion as well. Now, another part of this that got a lot of media attention was what happened related to the improvements in the building of the Tampa Heights Junior Civic Association, and the fact that they'd gotten a lot of grant money to do things, including money to put in a kitchen, and the owner of the Columbia restaurant pulled his support for the kitchen, finding out that maybe they weren't supposed to be remodeling the building. And as he said, shame on me for not checking to see if they own the property, said Gonsmart, who appears in a YouTube funding video on behalf of the civic organization. If I had known, I would have never made that commitment. And then there's more chastisement in this editorial that appears in the Tampa Bay Times. And this is the last paragraph of it particularly. It would be a shame if continuing to fight over developing the church ended up costing the association the support it needs to find a permanent home elsewhere, which is kind of a veiled threat. Okay. So the holidays, people went home for Christmas, nothing much happened. But in January, we have the release of the boondoggle report and all the reports that came out about that. So that got a lot of media attention in January. And then in February, a group of students at the University of South Florida put up a boondoggle video, which won a local award here on campus. I don't know, many people have probably already seen this a video. They drove through the neighborhoods and looked at impacted buildings, etc. And then in February and March, we have the beginning of what I guess I'm calling, maybe other people are calling, the poncho protests, which first time we did need it because it rained, but which has gotten significant media attention both in newspapers and television. And here are some stories about that. And then finally, in April, we had the media report about the charrettes, where opponents were saying they were not permitted to speak out against the overall project itself, and they thought they would be able to. There's an interesting quote in that particular article that says, from FDOT, it says, "We're listening to the fact that people don't want TBX, but FDOT has to consider the 19,000 people who live near this project. But it also has to consider the millions of people who use the interstate system and how much TBX could relieve congestion." But those are all issue questions, right? How much would TBX relieve congestion? And how much are these 19,000 people going to be impacted by all that is? That's a very interesting number. I've never seen that number before. So there has been more media coverage, and we can talk about that. I'll yield my time back to the next speaker. Okay.
So let's bring up Michelle Cookson, who is the Secretary of Sunshine Citizens, one of the grassroots organizations. Michelle?
Hi, good evening. Okay. Thanks for hanging in there. I knew I'd find it. Well, I was given a pretty broad topic to cover in 7 minutes. I have a fair number of slides. I'm going to fly through them. There might be some points that I blow right by. You'll be able to read them because I think some things have been touched on. But before we launched into alternative mass transit for the region, I just wanted to bring up with this point about we're starting with this assumption in play here that's based on a 1996 plan that says that we must widen the highway. And that's why I want to talk briefly about the concept of induced demand, which is a fact, a proven known thing, and traffic engineers know this, that when you widen highways, you're going to cause an increased demand for that road. So here's kind of this little pattern in how it goes, all right? They say, whoa, there's congestion, we need to widen this highway. Now that this highway's widened, it's going to create more traffic. Then that's going to lead to more congestion. That's going to increase. And then suddenly the next thing you hear is, hey, we need to widen this highway. So I just wanted to also add this quote from Lewis Mumford, which I think makes that point pretty succinctly too, which is, adding highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to cure obesity. So that's what, just keep that thought in mind when we keep hearing this is the only choice that we have. And we really want to look at, and you've heard it mentioned already, high capacity mass transit, multimodal, many modes, many ways of traveling and moving around, meaning you have more than one choice. I wanted to include this GIF. You might have seen this previously before, but I think it's a really good visual example that shows you again. I'm not really certain that we believe anymore that the car must be king. It's a really powerful visual. It just kind of reminds people, here's that amount of space taken up by 200 cars versus the same amount of people being able to move via bus or bike or some other means besides just a car. So what if instead of simply continuing to widen highways, we looked at a comprehensive system, something that worked together with many other modes to move goods and people? And that would be a mass transit system. Some of their great benefits are, they're providing greater mobility, they're going to use less resources, we're going to reduce car congestion, they're better for the environment, and one I think is really important to remember is they drive economic development. Contextually, too, we're at a really important crossroads in our history in Tampa. You've heard a lot about that, but it's 2016. There are a lot of, all over the nation, really important current demographic and economic trends happening. We have an aging population that's a lot of people in the baby boomers, and then consequently we have the next largest demographic group in the millennials. I'm going to guess that some people here at USF are in that group. This is your future we're talking about as well. Nationally, we also see changing consumer preferences. We've got a greater demand for people wanting to live in an urban environment, and Americans are walking and biking more. All of that's leading to increased demand for transit and its subsequent transit-oriented development. I think that's really important. I wanted to include something about that. This has been lost a lot in the conversation about this project, and it's really important in our area. We're seeing this currently. This is not a fantasy, this is reality. This is happening in car-centric, sprawling metropolitan areas all over the country. When they have committed to transit, they reap immediate economic development. I won't read through all of them, but I mention it frequently. Phoenix, Charlotte, Denver, Salt Lake City, Minneapolis.
Dallas, I mean, Houston, Texas, y'all, Texas. We can do better than Texas, honestly. But these are actual projects where when this commitment was made, they see an immediate economic impact. So the one I like to point out a lot, there is a Salt Lake City S-Line streetcar. It's a modern system. It drove more than $400 million in development before it boarded its first passenger. So when there's a commitment to these systems, there's an immediate private sector investment. And I think people like Mr. Vinnick and other leaders in our community, including Mr. Sykes, has written about this. They know this is a possibility, and they know this is what's probably best for us moving forward, not applying the same kind of 20th century thinking and economic model that's so car-centric. You can read some of those dollar figures, they're pretty substantial. So there's other economic benefits as well that are important to remember about transit. You know, these systems lead to higher property values, something that will be lost for the urban neighborhoods surrounding the highways, accelerated development like we're talking about, and increased connectivity to jobs and other opportunities. So that's really important to remember that a lot of people with different economic means need to work. So really, I think our way forward is mass transit. It's the way that we move beyond TBX. Because I was supposed to cover a bunch of systems, I'm going to fly through these slides. I just did some examples to have some visuals. Different kinds of systems or what those might be alternatives. Commuter rail systems. These pictures are the Tri-Rail system in Palm Beach, Broward, Dade County. And the bottom one's Sunrail. The other picture is showing you how cars have been transformed to include bike racks. Because with multimodal systems, we want them all to connect. Right? We want to have more than one way to move around. An example of what we might be able to have here, and was mentioned before, is the CSX lines in Tampa. There's an opportunity to purchase and convert these into a commuter rail system. This graphic in the lower part there is a shot from the MPO's Downtown Transit Assets and Opportunity Study. It's been going on. We've done so many studies in this area. I don't think we need to recreate the wheel. We need to pick up some of these plans and get going now. Really important. I'm showing you this example because for our audience, this shows you how we could connect the university area to downtown, and it does also show it going out west eventually to the airport. Most importantly, compare the cost here with what we've heard proposed with TBX. You're looking at $120 million a mile. This system represents an investment of $10 to $20 million a mile. Light rail. Points I want to make about that, it's an electric system, pollution-free, very quiet. It's a very space-efficient system, so you're looking at moving as many people as you would have in an 8-lane highway and what would be a 2-lane road. It's got a really good established track record, stable operating expenses. Another example from that same study where they also looked at, well, what if we did modern tram or modernizing our system, not the historic streetcar, but a new modern system. And again, when you look at this that's mapped out, that's pretty much modernizing and improving our service for the same cost for that whole system you're looking at as 1 mile TBX through the urban core. BRT, haven't heard this talked a lot about in the discussion locally, but it's something we could consider as well. You get the efficiencies of your metro rail systems, you have flexibility, and you have a little bit lower cost on the vehicles because they're buses. Those same environmental benefits, you're moving a lot more people in that space. You know, perhaps we can convert roadways and implement systems like this to get to a piece of transit. Oh, ferry, let me just fly through them. We also have a bus system. It would be great if we funded it more and made it more available. I ride the #1 line. It's a great system. Cycling and pedestrian. Let's expand those trails and other choices.
Okay.
Thanks.
So before I open it up to the floor, I want to ask Ed, who's in the lion's den here, obviously, tonight. Ed, give us, and maybe I'll have one of our previous responders too come up too, but Ed, tell us why you think this project, TBX, will reduce congestion here in the Tampa Bay area. And maybe Michelle, Michelle, would you
I
come up
think
and respond?
Michelle's probably a good person to come up because I loved her presentation. And what I think what's.
I noticed we were talking about some of the same things, and that's good.
I think what's important to understand in all of this is, as I've told Linda many times, there's a lot we could agree on. We agree that Tampa Bay Express needs more than just a roadway focus, or excuse me, congestion needs more than a roadway focus solution. There has to be another component, whether it's transit. We have, as I showed you on the slide, I mean, one of the efforts that we've initiated is the premium transit study, which we are paying for and HART is conducting. But to move that effort forward, to move those effort forwards and to be able to apply for FTA funding, you have to show that it's a feasible system and it could be operated for a period of 40 years. That's the challenge. And Linda knows best of all how difficult that is from a regional perspective, from an elected official perspective, from a voter perspective, how to generate that kind of revenue to make that level of commitment. It's a huge commitment. Orlando struggled with that for a long time before they were able to get the commitment they needed to move that project forward. But once they got the commitment, DOT partnered with the it escapes me now, I'm drawing a blank, but they partnered with the region and they developed a transit plan that DOT helped get the 50% funding for the capital cost through FTA.
But you know, I'm more interested in why do you think TBX is going to reduce the congestion that we see on the road?
Well,
make your case, because
okay.
I don't think we heard you make that case.
When you talk about congestion, we're not going to. TBX is not going on the. It is a congested highway now. It fails. The system fails. The interchange fails at both locations, and major parts of our interstate fail. What this project provides is it provides a corridor for individuals who choose to pay for the right to get to their location, and that's a personal choice, whether their time is valuable to them or what they don't want to sit in congestion. They have the right to pay for the privilege of using an express lane that's going to get them out of the, and understand, there is no free lanes in Florida. Whether you drive a lane or whether you drive an express lane, you're paying for the privilege every time you put gas in your car. You're paying for the privilege of using that lane. There is nothing free here. So you're actually paying for the ability to get into a managed lane. And when we say managed lane, the price manages the congestion. So as congestion increases, the price increases to a level that people will drop out of the express lanes back into the general purpose lanes and preserving that trip reliability within the express lanes. It does free up capacity on the general purpose lanes. Federal highways already demonstrated. The induced demand issue does come into play because people that are on local streets will begin to use the expressway as they see, or will be able to use the interstate as they see the demand decreasing, which is a good thing because the city of Tampa wants to do complete street road diet treatments along Florida and Tampa. That will give them the ability to do that because it'll take congestion off those streets, which are major interstate relievers today, and put those cars on the interstate. So I don't know if I've answered your question completely, but there's a lot of factors here I think that also have to be.
Okay, so Michelle, what would you say back to Ed?
Okay. I guess probably one of the biggest concerns I have with hearing that express lanes are congestion relieving, because I understand that's a pain point for a lot of people in a world where they don't have any other choice but to get in a car because our built environment keeps making that their only choice. But when we study how these have been implemented all over the country, and there's probably people in the audience who are who are better with engineering than I am, and they'll correct me because I see them sitting out there, but congestion pricing as a model is based on making things so painful that it actually is going to increase congestion in the general purpose lanes. So I guess the only congestion it relieves is for somebody wealthy enough to use the express lane. Is that it?
But you're not seeing that. What you're seeing in Miami is you're seeing the opposite of what she just
That's
said.
not what I'm hearing from
You're seeing the
Miami.
exact opposite. Now, I mean, you could say, and we could throw around things all we want, but what you're seeing in Miami is you're seeing actually, the express lanes are being very efficient, and you're seeing increases in the general purpose lane and speed. So it's demonstrating that freeing of capacity.
Okay, let me bring up one more issue and then we're going to open up the floor. Ed, stay up if you will. Michelle, you can sit down, but I want to ask.
Thanks a lot.
I want to ask Cheryl, would you come up? I'm wondering, do you think that we're making the same mistake that we made in the 60s? And I want to ask you that question, and Ed, how many people will lose their homes as a result of this? So Cheryl, are we making the same mistake as we did in the 60s?
I really believe we are.
Stand up, listen. Oh, sorry, okay. One of the reasons I talked about that, I mentioned that history, and thank you for acknowledging that, is because I think that as
one of my colleagues said, we're doing thinking that's for the 20th century rather than thinking about what we need in the 21st century. Our needs are different. It's not just that our needs are different, it's that we have to change, and we know it. You know, our environment demands that we change, that we think of different solutions to our current problems. I like the idea of, you know, stop being car-centric, you know, that we have to stop. We have to think of our lives in a different context. So, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, so Ed, what would you say to Cheryl? We're making the same mistakes we did in the 60s, and how many people will lose their homes as a result of the TBX project?
Well, I have no, I mean, that, she feels the way she feels, and I would totally respect that. There's 110 residential properties in the original document, and that's the original environmental impact statement. We are still looking at design concepts for the downtown interchange that may reduce that number. We are looking at 27 commercial properties. Again, we have not finalized our design concept, so that may or may not be reduced. And that's in the downtown interchange area.
Okay, let's open up.
Can I ask a question I'm so curious about? Ed, couldn't we do the Howard Franklin Bridge and not the rest of it? And the improvements near the airport and West Shore without destroying the neighborhoods? I mean, couldn't we do that as a standalone project and get the funding without doing the managed toll lanes or whatever? I mean, wasn't the Howard Franklin Bridge on the books anyway? I mean,
Well,
I
yes.
remember for a long time.
The Howard Franklin Bridge has to be replaced.
We all agree, and it's funded, and it's planned, and it's gonna happen. So putting it, to me, putting it under the TBX umbrella is a way to legitimize the rest of TBX. It didn't used to be under that umbrella, because there didn't used to be a TBX. It used to just be, let's fix the Howard Franklin Bridge and the West Shore area.
No, it was always part of the managed lane system that it was envisioned. It was,
There didn't used to be a managed lane system.
actually, the original document included a special purpose lane as well as an HOV lane within the
But those were
document.
different. The HOV lanes, which were for buses, were not,
No, the HLV lane is now the envelope that's in the corridor for premium transit.
Exactly.
The special purpose lane is now what we're because originally it was HOV. But HOV is proven to be you can't, it's very hard to enforce it. It's impossible to enforce HOV. So, and as a department policy, we have decided that we are going to use congestion pricing to manage congestion.
That's the
why we've
difference.
chosen.
That's the difference.
That's why we've
And when the
chosen that.
MPO originally approved these lanes, they were supposed to be for buses, and it wasn't.
No, it wasn't buses. You're mistaking the corridor that's been set up, which was,
For the transit corridor,
Right.
okay, but that doesn't go north-south, that's not what's gonna hurt these neighborhoods. That's
well,
an east-west
now understand,
on
there is no,
I-4.
okay, north of MLK, there's on the northeast, well, let me finish, on the northeast corner, there is some right-of-way takes. North of MLK, heading up to, there is no additional right-of-way in the Seminole Heights area. Predominantly, the right-of-way is in the Tampa Heights VME board area.
Okay, so let's, I see question there, question there, question here, question there. Let's take questions with the people raising their hands first. But I just want to suggest that the question lasts a minute and the answer lasts a minute, if that's okay. Sir?
Okay, I'd like to go back to the needs assessment in the TBX master plan, which is based on the Tampa Interstate Study, which was done in 1996, the household survey, the data. 20 years old now. And the model that it yields is demonstrably bad. It grossly overstates interstate demand. And the magnitude of the error grows at times because it's an exponential failure. Now, no competent professional statistician would build anything on a model like that. And I know at USF, if a graduate student submitted work of that caliber to a seminar in statistical methods, the student would flunk and be kicked out of graduate school and then go work for FDOT.
You know,
But, so the question is, why
That's
is
unnecessary.
FDOT
That's
using?
unnecessary.
Why
That's
is
totally
FDOT
unnecessary.
using a model, I mean, because the way the study works, right, it's a household survey, and they say, how often do you use the interstate, where would you live, blah, 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 and so it predicts if over Y years, X thousand households relocate to the Tampa Bay area, they're gonna go here and here and here, out in greater suburbia, they won't be going to the urban core, and that's the source of a lot of the error.
okay, so could you wrap it up with a question?
So the question is, well, I guess here's the problem. Do you have any basis for the projection of traffic doubling that's based on actual scientifically sound statistical research?
Traffic today is roughly, and I've got, is roughly 180 cars, ADT, on the interstate. It's designed for roughly 140, 130, so it already fails. If you look at population growth in the region, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Population's increasing in the region. Tampa Tribune recently put it around 3% annually. That was their projected growth, and that's what they're seeing. People aren't driving less; they're driving more. With gas prices, with gas prices the way they are, we're seeing vehicle miles traveled increasing considerably, and we are, as someone pointed out, we are very much a car-centric society. Changing that behavior is not something that, we're not in the behavioral management business.
Okay, so, can I suggest too, as we take these questions, let's not try to get personal, if that's okay with you all. Let's take a question from over here, sir.
Hi, thank you for this amazing forum. I'd just like to ask Mr. King a question about one of the comments that Mrs. Senna,
Yes.
Senna made earlier about how Scott killed a project of light rail, speed light rail.
High-speed rail.
High-speed rail, thank you, of $2.8 million coming from the federal government.
Right.
Billion dollars. $8 billion
by arguing that $1 billion would come from Florida's taxpayers' money, but then he's proposing today along the same corridor a project that is costing $9 billion. Can you please elaborate on that?
$9 billion, I'm not sure what project you're referring to, is $9 billion. Okay, the project, the TBX project that's on this map is roughly $3.1 billion. The master plan is roughly $6 billion in total. What was taken out of context is someone added those two numbers together and created a $9 billion project. It's not a $9 billion project. It's a 3.3. If you built it all, it's roughly about a $6 billion project.
So again, my question is, how come Governor Scott killed a project which cost less than?
You would have to ask him. That was a decision.
Okay, so let's go to this side. Pat, did you want to ask a question?
I wanted to ask a question about vehicle miles traveled, because I noticed that you said that about vehicle miles traveled increased, but I know that in 2/3 of the nation and in the state of Florida, through our DOT, vehicle miles traveled actually flattened out in 2007 and went down, and they're not even up to the 2007 levels. Before that, we had a mountain and then flat in 2/3 of the states in Florida, despite our growing population. And I pulled the records for state roads in Hillsborough County, trying to figure out too in Hillsborough County, and a lot of major arterials in Hillsborough County where they have the traffic counts every year from like 2006 to 2014 actually show that we have many fewer cars traveling the roads, believe it or not, in Hillsborough County. And why aren't we hearing that? And I even saw articles from 2008 where the DOT people were scratching their heads and saying something's wrong with these traffic counts. We have a mistake here. There's some inaccuracies, but actually it's been backed up by the further years, and that is here without we're not doing anything here with to bring mass transit to this area. We still have no plans, and it's really remiss, it seems, of DOT not to work on that first.
Well, again, I don't disagree with the transit issue. I think we could probably all agree that that's a needed part of this. But let me talk about I don't know which specific you're talking about. I don't have that reference. But during 2007, which we all know was the recession, there was a decrease in vehicle miles traveled. We are actually seeing those numbers increase back to the same levels they were.
The recession.
Well, I don't know the data you're speaking to. We are actually seeing vehicle miles traveled increase, and they are back to the levels that they were previously. On the interstate, you know, the vehicles, the ADT traffic numbers are showing right now are about 180,000 cars using the interstate on a roadway that was designed for roughly 150, number of cars. So it's failing now. And as the population increases, as more people drive on it, that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're faced with. Do we need to look at multiple solutions to solve this problem? Don't disagree with that. But as you said, why hasn't this region addressed that problem? That's not a question I can answer.
All
That's
right,
probably-
let's take, sir, you've been waiting for
I
one.
think you'll find that transit in an area like Hillsborough County is problematic, and that's because of the distribution of the population. We don't have the density. AECom recently did a study of all of the routes that were ever proposed in this county for fixed guideway, which would be bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes and a rail. And they found that, and they updated all the data, and they found that there was not a single project that would qualify for federal grant money. To qualify for federal grant money, the key is ridership, not how much money you can raise locally. The key is ridership. You gotta have people, you have to demonstrate that the community wants to use transit. Our ridership is low because of our population density. We're spread out all over.
Well, let's have either.
I don't think I've used a minute yet.
Uh,
Somebody time it?
You have 9 seconds.
I'm
I'm timing.
I have 9 seconds?
Okay, so you're kidding me, I'm sorry.
That's
Michelle or Linda, would you like to answer that question, or?
I was just gonna say that, I would like to know exactly what was cited, and additionally, this is such a chicken and egg circular conversation that's happening then, because, and I don't believe that's true with the current funding that's available from the federal government, which has been trying to incentivize these programs and get us to the point.
If you
where-
give me your email address, I'll send you the AECom study.
Okay, that's AECom, but I'm trying to address what he just asked me to answer. So there are current federal funding programs that have been trying to incentivize these programs and to provide funding for transit systems. When you commit to them and you build them and you secure that funding to do so, you change the development pattern. You bring urban density development patterns in that create the ability to have ridership success and to have those numbers be met. So if you continue to perpetuate a system that will not allow you to make that number, then you're perpetuating, it's just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I mean,
Okay.
I can just speak to development patterns in Hillsborough County, and I can tell you that urban density is absolutely different now than it was 15 years ago. We now have 5,000 people in the Channel District, we'll soon have 5,000 downtown, and that really changes.
But remember, you have almost 5 million people on the peripheral edges of.
If you go
of the
3
county.
counties wide, you're
If you go
right,
around
but if
what's
you-
called the Tampa Bay region, you're talking almost 5 million people.
but if you build a system where you have density, you loosen up a road for those people in the
I
surrounding
don't
counties.
disagree, and that's the challenge. I mean, the demographics of this region is a huge challenge to transportation folks, because look at Pasco County along 54, 56 corridor. Look at what they're doing in South Hillsborough
Do
County.
we care?
You have to care.
Okay, so,
Region, you have to care.
let's
You
take,
have to care.
let's take this gentleman right here, sir.
So, my two biggest concerns about TBX is one, the cost and the actual benefit of what we're getting with it. Two, which is I think not talked about enough, is the engineering. And I'm gonna give an engineering and an entrepreneurial perspective, and then I'll put that into a question. The engineering is so bad on the project, there's no way it should even get approved to get to a design build, okay? And I'll tell you that fundamentally, any engineer, if there's any engineer here or anybody at FDOT, if you put a T-junction in the heart of the most congested part of a metropolitan area, you're gonna get congestion, right? Because it's gonna stop traffic flow. TBX takes that design flaw and it makes it double in size. In other words, you take a bottleneck and you make it bigger. That alone should kill the project. That alone is enough. Forget statistics, right? It should have never been built in the first place the way it did. It's bad engineering, period.
Okay.
Taking that and enlarging it. Second part.
You have 5 seconds.
All right, well,
All right.
I'll stick with engineering stuff.
Okay, good.
I have no response.
Okay,
So my question is that good engineering?
Yeah, is that good engineering?
I think we have some of the best engineers in the country working
So
on this
yes?
project.
Absolutely. Okay, he says he's got some of the best engineers in the country. Sir, over here.
If you said the problem is congestion mitigation, and we now have devices that make the driver much more intelligent, I mean, we're not stupid anymore. We have information systems. To what extent could congestion mitigation occur just through improved information systems that are available to us?
Could be huge. I mean,
Have you looked at that?
it could be huge, and we are looking at that. We actually have our secretary, Paul Steinman, is one of the leaders in the country when it comes to autonomous vehicle technology and bringing that to Florida and incorporating that into our designs. We again, understand, building road, we agree, building roads is not a solution, a way to build ourselves out of congestion. So finding alternative ways to deal with the issue, we agree with that. I don't think there's any disagreement there. And if technology gets us there, then all the better.
Well, wouldn't you look at that as the first order of things?
Where is, that question is,
Spending
we are,
billions of dollars.
as we're evolving this project, we're still in the you gotta understand, we're still in the environmental stage of this project. So we're still looking at things. Let me answer your question. We are still looking at all options, and if there's a technology that comes to us that provides us that solution, absolutely we will incorporate it.
Okay. Back here, question?
I'm going to stand up. I'm going to stand up not because I love to be seen, but I want you to see the color of my skin. I want you to explain to me how I could say to my great-grandchildren and my great-great-grandchildren today that what happened to their population, to their African-American and other Hispanics 60 years ago, that the Secretary of the Department of Transportation on a national level is now acknowledging that what was done to communities like mine was unfair. It impacted us socially, it impacted us environmentally. We have some of the highest levels of illness among our population. And I want to know how you could stand there and justify that you could bring more roads, do the same thing, add insult to injury. After 60 years of doing it, after acknowledging what was done to us, that now you stand there and say, it's okay. There are millions of people, you said, that this is going to help, and it's only going to affect, according to your number, 19 or whatever. How can I tell my grandchildren, and we're some that believe that we could make a difference in the world, how can I tell my grandchildren that the Department of Transportation, after acknowledging what they've done for all that time, now come back and say, we're going to do it again because we have to affect millions of people, but you will be sacrificed one more time. I can't understand that. When there are other possibilities, those millions of people could come around our area, and you all could make it happen. And for you to stand there and say it's justifiable, when you on your own website says, this will never solve congestion. It's on your website.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Ed is passing on this one. We've got a question there. Did I miss anybody over here on this time? Okay, all right.
Oh, me first?
Yeah, do you want to go first?
One is that you mentioned that there needed to be a feasibility and that there had to be, that we had to prove that this would work for 40 years. And
Transit?
Yes, and
Okay.
I was wondering, you didn't mention a law or anything that states that, but it just sounded like that was a done deal.
Well, that's an FTA. FTA will contribute up to 50% of the capital cost of a transit New Start program. To guarantee that their money is not going to be wasted or not used, they want to ensure that, and the region or the agency that's going to operate it has to demonstrate the financial capabilities of operating that system for at least 40 years.
So it's not contractual, or it's contractual and not a law?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I would have to do a little more research, but we could provide that. If you want to know if it's specific to a law or is it FTA regulations or somewhere in their code, I don't know the answer to that.
Let's go here, and then we'll go here. You, ma'am.
I work in the field of transportation demand management, and what that is figuring out, instead of expanding the supply, expanding the capacity of a transportation facility, you are managing the demand, and you're using all the tools in the transportation toolbox to do that. For example, if the facility is failing, what about the capacity that remains during other times of the day? So my question to you is it possible, since so much has changed in the last 20 years, is it possible that the DOT could step back and re-study this, take a fresh look at the things that have changed and reconsider?
As part of our reevaluation, which we have to go through, that's exactly what we're doing. We will reevaluate all of the traffic demand. We will reevaluate the models. We will reevaluate the impacts to communities. Everything that was evaluated in the original document has to be reevaluated for today's conditions and for future conditions. So that's part of the reevaluation process that we are going through now.
And what is that called? Is that a PD&E?
It's a PD&E reevaluation in some parts. It's actually in some areas like the northern piece of I-275, that's a new PD&E document. On I-4 is a new document. Howard Franklin Bridge is a new document. And then the pieces in the middle are a reevaluation of the EIS.
Does that have a public participation process in it?
Yes.
Could I ask Rebecca and could I ask Cheryl, you said the times have changed. When these first projects went through in the 1960s, there weren't these kind of requirements to look at the needs of the community, that we have new laws that cover where these roads can go. Could you elaborate on that and how the new laws might impact the future of this proposed project?
There are several laws under consideration. I mean, not to be too nerdy about it, but first of all, there's some new considerations around the environmental issues specifically, and that's why the Environmental Protection Agency put out the Environmental Justice Screening Tool. I haven't run I'm waiting on them to update those numbers in there, but there are 12 indicators, and I just showed you the screenshot from traffic proximity. But of concern is particulate matter and your proximity to a roadway facility and adding capacity to a roadway facility adds more particulate matter. And as we know, low-income and minority communities are subject to more asthma. So that's so that's a concern. That's one example. Also, there are the social issues, and I talked about displacement and disruption and what happens with communities. So you get Title VI issues arising, and also environmental justice, which, while it is not a law, it does require that if federal funds are used, that disproportionately high and adverse impact should not happen to low-income and minority communities.
And I'm not sure I understand Title VI, and I don't know if everybody here does, but
Okay.
Could you explain what Title VI is?
Title VI says that if the benefits of a project should be equitably shared, and if they're not, then then that's discrimination. So as Lena mentioned, if this project is going to benefit these 5 million people, but 19,000 would be injured, there should, ideally what should happen with these projects, and I've written extensively about it, is that we try to avoid adverse impacts. If we can't, we mitigate or minimize, and the enhancement should happen. And so that's
Okay.
the thing.
Let's go over here, you've been waiting for a while.
I keep hearing that we're still in a study phase and a new reevaluation of the project has to be done, yet FDOT continues to purchase and demolish property within the way and surrounding this project throughout the entire system. So I want to know, will FDOT stop doing that until these studies and reevaluations are?
We are buying from willing sellers. People are coming to us wanting to sell their property, and if they want to sell their property, we know we have original master plan document which includes their property, we will purchase it.
How is that a best practice, and how is that?
It's done all over the country. It's how it
it
minimizes the eminent domain impact to folks. If people are coming to us as willing sellers, then we are going to take advantage of that opportunity, and we are going to treat them in accordance with the Fair Relocation Act, and we're gonna purchase their property.
We've got Linda and we've got Rebecca, and I know I sense that people are talking over each other, and so how many more minutes, Cecil and Rebecca, should we go? Let's do 10 more minutes, and Rebecca, you first, and then Linda, so.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is, will the results of the restudy be available to the public and to the MPO prior to this very key vote in June?
No, we're still.
Or is this an ongoing process?
Well, all of our documents are available. We've put most of our documents on our website. If the MPO wants to see something specifically, we'll make it available to them, but the study is ongoing, so it won't be completed by June 22nd.
So I guess the question follows that is, how are the elected officials going to be informed about the current situation 20 years on, if that information is not available to them?
Okay, so the June 22nd vote is a vote on the 5-year TIP document. The TIP document is a transportation improvement plan that we produce every year. We produce it working with our local MPO and state funding that's for state-managed programs, and we produce it. It has every project in it, from our maintenance project to our resurfacing to our port, airport. All of those projects are in that document. What the MPO is committing to is only the new year of this. So what they're going to commit to is the funding in the year 17, because that's the upcoming fiscal year, 16-17. They will get the document again next year, and they will vote on the next year. So as TBX, and there's two projects in the TIP document that are currently funded for construction related to Tampa Bay Express. Those projects are out in 20 and 21. There is right-of-way phases as we're adding money to the program for the acquisition, for advanced acquisition as properties come available. So those funds are shown in the TIP document. There is some in the upcoming 17 years. So even though they're going to vote on I'm not sure if I'm making complete sense here, but if they're going to vote on that complete document, but the only commitment is that 16-17 year. They'll have another opportunity every year up until the year of construction, to commit to that project.
Okay, and a second question I have relates to the 5 million people who hypothetically may be utilizing this toll
That live in the region.
That live in the region. Right. Has there been a demand study among those residents to see if this is actually something they would use or can commit to, can afford? Because I guess to me that seems like kind of another key point in which, if there's a lot of assumptions being made about the demand and how that's likely to reduce congestion. So, I guess another, a piece of that is there community engagement with those communities around the suburban periphery about what kinds of urban core they would like to see? So,
yes, they're part of the outreach. I'm not a traffic modeler, but through the traffic modeling that we do, they are considered as part of that. We do look at travel demand, origin destination studies. We do the part of the modeling process that goes into where are people going to go, where they work, how are they going to use the interstate.
But you're not holding these kinds of charrettes or engagement in those kinds of communities.
Right now, we're focused on the area that's going to be receiving the biggest impact, and we recognize that's in the Tampa Heights, Seminole Heights, BME Bore, the downtown area. Those are the folks that are going to be heavily impacted by the reconstruction of the interchange. So we're reaching out to those residents and trying to identify what are some of the things as we move forward with this project. What are things, as I showed on the slides, we can incorporate into the project that might enhance the neighborhoods and provide some new connections where we've removed connections in the past. Maybe improve some streets, make some complete streets out of streets that may not be, in the best shape today. But trying to identify what the community is telling us they need and they want to see out of them.
So you're listening to what the community is telling you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so if we have about 5 minutes left, we've got people over here and people over here.
I have an
Linda,
easy question.
Yeah.
Is the CSX part of the premium transit study that you all are gonna put out to bid soon? The
Well, Hart's
the
gonna put out
use
the-
of the
Hart-
CSX
Absolutely,
trucks.
it'll be part of that show.
And that, you're going out to bid this summer and it'll be done in like a year and a half?
Yeah, Hart's actually doing it, but yes,
But y'all are funding it?
we're funding it.
Okay, so my just proposal to you all would be that you put TBX on ice till you get the results of that. That would be a clearer.
So we've got Gary up front, we've got two questions over here. Gary, you want to go first?
Yeah, if I wanted to take the leg from the interchange out to Barris,
Mhm.
number one, how much would it cost me to do that? And how much will it cost me to do that in 2021 when this is built? And then secondly, I think you said there are about 180,000 people that use the interstate daily. What part of the interstate are we talking about?
It's various parts. I mean, it's higher and lower in different pieces. I'm kind of using an average of average users.
How
of
many
the
people are
interstate.
going to use that lane, that Lexus lane?
We don't know. We're doing a feasibility study now. That's part of the analysis.
So we're going to build it and then figure it out?
No. Part of, right now, as I said, we're going through the study phase. Part of that study is looking at the feasibility for what the toll rates need to be to manage the congestion, what's the volume of traffic that will be using those lanes. That's all part of the study that we're currently under.
Okay, let's go over here. I know we've got questions. Let's go, you had your hand up for a while, then we'll go back there, and Chris wants a question too.
I have a quick question. You mentioned in the charrettes that you work with Seminole Heights, Tampa Heights, Ybor, and all the other neighborhoods on identifying ways to improve the community, like build basketball courts, complete streets, you name it. I heard in another meeting that you may assist with the funding of those community improvements, but will you be doing any of the ongoing maintenance on that? Because I heard that wouldn't be a part of the TBX budget or.
Well, depending on what we're talking about, if it's on a state facility, we will be part of that maintenance effort. If it's not on a state facility, by law, we cannot participate. It will have to be the city of Tampa taking on that maintenance.
So that's something else would be taxed on?
Taxed on?
Yeah.
That,
The ongoing maintenance? or-
I don't know how the city would determine that they're gonna pay for that.
Let's go back here for a question.
I just wanted to ask, you say that you're researching this need for development. However, have you considered for a moment that the need would only be because we have no other options? We can't travel besides car. There's no other way for us to get around, so building doesn't really solve the option.
And I don't disagree with that statement. But that statement, that question needs to be addressed on a regional level through your MPO, through your elected officials who ultimately make those decisions. Regional Tampa transportation, Hart buses, whether out of this study comes some premium transit option, is not something the department's gonna operate or is gonna maintain. That's gonna be managed by your most likely Hart or PSTA in Pinellas County or Pasco Transit. One of those agencies will have to manage this. Or it could be managed by a regional organization that they decide to form and run the system. That will have to be determined as a region how they want to move forward with that. We will partner with that and we will contribute to that. But until that plan is developed, there's really, until somebody agrees to what that plan's gonna be, and I think Michelle talked about that considerably, we don't have an answer for that question.
So Ed, to that point though, does it have to be regional? I mean, couldn't Hillsborough County pass a plan and couldn't we
Sure.
get started on some of the things
Sure.
I feel like we've
They
been
could.
studying it for 20 years.
They could.
So if
And-
people in the room understand that they went to the MPO and they contacted the county commissioners and they contacted their city council members and that's their demand. It's just sometimes I think it gets communicated, it could only be based on the region.
Well, for FTA to be a partner, it has to be a regional transportation, it has to be a
Can
regional
you explain
transit.
to them who FTA is and what that money means?
Okay, now, FTA is the Federal Transit Administration. Now, there are different programs with FTA. I'm talking about there are some small start programs that might qualify, and I'm not a transit expert, okay? I'm not, and there may be other people here that can chime in on this. So depending on what they come up with, we will work with them, regardless of whether it's a Hart City-centric solution, because as I showed you on the slide, I mean, we're helping with the streetcar study, we're helping with circular studies. We are trying to find ways to partner with some sort of transit solution, but ultimately, in the end, it's gonna have to be the responsibility of either the local transit agency or a regional transit agency if we go to a big global, a larger scale transit solution.
Let's go to Chris over here.
Hello. We're missing an important community here today. That's Robert City, all the residents there. And Amanda brought up a point. Since 2016, the beginning of the year, we've lost about 4 properties in West Shore and also in West Tampa, Tampa Heights, and Ybor. So these are all the areas that have suffered impacts, cumulative effects, and so forth. So my question to you is, on Thursday at the CRA meeting, will FTOP say a statement that they will not demo any properties, even if they own them or not? Will you guys do that? And then I have one additional question. How does one release the TIS boundaries? Because it seems like the biggest problem right now is that you're designating an area that's historic, that suffered a lot of damage. And I think the first step really is for you guys to release those boundaries. So how would someone do that?
I think we've done that. We've released the
So you don't have
TIS
TIS boundaries at all? Is that
boundary
what you're
maps. If we haven't, Chris, I will look to see.
But I mean, if there is, like, how would a citizen would go and release those boundaries? Like, how would one petition for FDOT to release those boundaries?
To release I'm not sure.
The Tampa interstate boundary?
Yeah, I understand what that is. I'm not sure what you mean by a citizen release.
Make public?
Basically, you dissolve that. And so what happens at that point is that now anybody who wants to invest in those properties, any type of opportunity for ownership and empowerment, we don't have to be worried about any expansion of the interstate. So that is what I'm getting at. It's like, how, as a citizen, would one petition for FDOT to release those boundaries?
Right now, our TIS document is still the governing document that we're working off of, so.
Are you guys gonna go to the CRA meeting on Thursday?
I will be at the CRA
Will you
meeting.
say that you're not gonna demo any properties?
I cannot say that.
All right, thanks. Do we have, sir, did you have a question in the back there, or, no? Okay. Are we almost wrapped up? Well, we've got,
This isn't a question, I just want to say that currently what the city does is they don't protect these buildings, they require them to be photographed before they're demolished.
and what does that do for the building?
It means we have a photographic record of what used to be there.
All right.
Very quick question. I'm trying to understand, if someone takes a job in West Shore and buys a house in Wesley Chapel, that person has knowingly opted for a lifestyle that involves a lot of sitting traffic. I hear you saying that in order to relieve the pain that this person knowingly opted for, the neighborhoods and livelihoods of people who live in the city have to be sacrificed. Is that the deal?
That is not what I said.
Then how do we get to this idea that 19,000 people are going to get the shaft in order for greater suburbia to have an easy commute?
Okay, are we done?
All right, so he's passing on that. Could I see a show of hands of how many people would take a train to USF if there was a train to USF? Could I see a show of hands of how many of you have talked to your county commissioner and said you think a train is a good idea? Smaller number. All right, well, I think we're at an end. And thank you all for coming out, and thanks to USF for sponsoring this. And thanks to our panel.
I would just like to thank Cecil, the Sociology Department, and the Anthropology Graduate Student Organization who got this room for us.